Water lilies, I think the quintessential pond plant. The image of a lily pad floating on the surface with a little frog sitting on top is the absolute cliche of pond images and frequently used in a lot of logos in my trade. But as beautiful as lilies are, they often need a lot of attention, and if they're left to their own devices for any length of time, they can get quite unruly and can be quite difficult to manage. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and if you haven't seen any of my videos before, I do everything aquatic. I design and construct ponds and water features, and I maintain ponds and filtration systems. And at this time of year, this is spring, end of April, early May, you can see the lovely marsh marigolds behind me, just coming to the end of their flowering period, but definite signs of spring when the marigolds are in flower. And at this time of year, the lilies are just starting to get their leaves, their pads up at the surface. Now, there are some telltale signs when a water lily needs attention. During the summer months, if the leaves are held proud above the water surface, that's often an indicator that the lily is either pot bound, has broken through its basket, potentially is growing in too shallow a water, or it could be too large a variety in the first place. But often, when a water lily gets really large, the root structure, the rhizome, the fibrous kind of white roots, the mass of root becomes so buoyant that it starts to lift the plant to the surface. And once it gets closer to the surface, that's when those leaves are then sort of held proud above the water. But at this time of year, spring, as the leaves are starting to reach the surface, one of the obvious telltale signs is you see an abundance of white roots starting to come through the basket, or starting to lift or tip or move the basket. And that's a clear indicator that it's pot bound, it needs to be split, potted on, and that's what I'm going to do today. It's a miserable day. It was lovely and sunny this morning, but I can't always bring the good weather with me. And as I always say in this job, I get wet doing it, whatever the weather. So I'm prepared, I'm my waders, got my waterproofs, got my gloves. I'm sure the image probably isn't going to be quite as nice with this rain rather than blue skies and sunshine. There's been the odd rumble of thunder and a few flashes of lightning as well, so it could be quite an exciting video. But I'm going to get into the pond, lift out a couple of these lilies that I can see need to be split. I've gone round, there's probably 7 or 8 lilies in this pond, and the vast majority of them are still well contained in their basket. And by that I mean I'm giving them a little prod with my foot and making sure that they're well anchored and not feeling buoyant. If I can move them or tip them quite easily, they feel quite light, that's a sign it needs to come out of the pond. I'll split it, get some of the best growing and into a bigger basket, make sure they're well anchored, and then put them back into the pond. Now, before I get my hood up and brave the rain out here, I'm currently sheltering underneath my little gazebo. Perhaps you might like to take a minute just to like and subscribe this video. And if you have any interest at all in anything aquatic, gardening, horticulture, plant life, perhaps you might like to look at some of my older videos as well. But liking and subscribing really helps the channel, so thank you very much. Being in water is not the best place to be in this sort of weather. Now, this is quite a messy job. As you can see, the mass of what was once just one lily has since broken through the basket. Its rhizome has crept out, sending out lots and lots of these white fibrous roots as well. And it's this stuff which is really, really buoyant, and it collects leaves and other debris, and the whole lot then just starts to come to the surface. So a few useful tools for this job. Quite simply, maybe a plastic tarp or a sheet, just to stop all the mud and debris from making a mess everywhere, a pair of secateurs, and most useful of all, a little folding saw, and it's this that I use most. Now, the water lily, the bulk of the growing section is, there we go, let's break a bit of this off, eyes of growth protruding out of the thick rhizome. And it's this section here which is going to produce all of this season's growth. In fact, we've got lots of leaves and pads and even some little buds ready here for later on in the summer. And from a water lily plant like this, you can probably make 2, 3, 4 or even more in some big masses of some decent viable plants, simply by breaking away sections of that rhizome and focusing on all of these little sections here when you've got these growing tips. So I'm going to work my way through this now, hanging on to all of the very obvious growth where these eyes are, and each one of these is going to produce a good sized plant, and all of this white kind of fibrous root is going to go in the compost bin. Just been handed a cup of tea. Cheers. Very nice. Now this is by no means a particularly advanced state of being overgrown for this lily. I mean, you'll encounter ponds, small ponds, where the entire surface is just one solid massive root. The whole lot's lifted, you could literally walk across it. To try and deal with something like that, I mean, physically it's quite tough and difficult, and the only way to do it is to just break it up into small manageable pieces. Obviously if you're chopping it up and you're in the pond, you've got to be very careful of the pond liner, cables. That's a terrible one. Even I've gone through a pump cable before doing this. Cables actually is a really bad one with water lilies. Invariably once the lily starts to grow, the cables just get tangled up and sort of snared in amongst the root mass, and when the plant's really big and you have to chop it up into sections to remove it, you've got to be very, very careful to make sure when you're cutting that you're not going to go through a cable. Now when I actually start planting these, I'm neating it up, but for the time being I'm just getting the bulk of the good bits. Right, I've salvaged all the good bits, given them a bit of a tidy. I'm now going to put them into a new basket. This is a classic pond basket, a mesh basket that allows the roots to grow through. It was a little bit fashionable a while ago for these sort of fibrous baskets. They could also be used as a liner, but sometimes people would use them, I myself included, as a basket in its own right. And actually I've found over the years that they contain the plant too well. It doesn't allow the roots to grow through, the plant becomes pot bound, doesn't do so well. So much better to have a fine mesh basket like this that will allow lots of that white fibrous root to grow through, picking up lots of nutrients from the pond. And periodically, seasonally, it's worth lifting the basket from the pond and just breaking away, cutting away some of those roots that have grown through, so that you can try and keep the plant contained for as long as possible in this one basket. Now there's lots of different varieties of water lily, some very small pygmy varieties such as the pygmy helvola or the pygmy rubra, and of course they're going to get lost in a basket this sort of size. But for most sort of large, medium to large water lilies, and certainly in a pond of this sort of size, you want to make sure that they're in as big a basket as possible. Now this kind of basket, which is still bigger than most baskets that you'll find a lily for sale in, really isn't big enough, and the plant has been in this basket for a couple of years, so that's all it's taken before it's needed this sort of attention. So much better to go with a bigger pot straight away. Now I'm not using any aquatic compost. Aquatic compost by its very nature is low nutrient. High nutrient compost is only going to encourage algae and blanket weed. So aquatic compost is a low nutrient planting medium. So we don't need it at all. We can actually use just a fine horticultural grit. In this case I'm just using a 10mm dressing, a 10mm gravel. And this is light enough and a light enough kind of structure that it's going to allow the lily roots and rhizome to grow through quite happily unhindered. But it's heavy enough that it's going to provide a nice ballast in keeping this water lily anchored and at the bottom of the pond for a long time. And it's cheaper still than aquatic compost. So I'm just starting by sort of 3/4 filling this basket, and then when I put the water lilies in, I want to make sure that I've got a big chunk of rhizome, a small amount of this white sort of fibrous root, and that I've got this eye, this growing tip. And if you just remember, a shoot and a root, that's all you need, it's going to be viable. And when we plant it, we want to make sure that this eye, this growing tip, is just at the surface or just fractionally above the gravel. We don't want to bury that too much if we can help it, otherwise the plant might not grow and then it will set rot into the rhizome. So from that one plant, we're going to get 2 big baskets. Now they're loosely in. I'm just going to add a bit more gravel. And if you find that you planted these a little bit too deep, you just very carefully with the growing tips, bit of the foliage, just lift that rhizome slightly closer to the surface so that it's not buried. There we go. So it's as simple as that. That's one plant. And obviously this, that's a 25 kilo bag of gravel. This is 25 kilos. It's going to take an awful lot to get that to the surface. But equally it's quite tough putting it back into the pond. Just taking the second lily out of the pond. Again, slightly smaller variety, but really in a basket that's too small for this. And as you can see, just very quickly, all this massive root growing through has sort of tipped it onto its side. And what I saw wasn't the pads at the surface, they haven't quite reached the surface yet, but this massive root was up here close to the surface, so that was a real telltale sign that this needed some attention. So I've taken that out of its basket entirely. I'm not going to worry about breaking this up or trying to tease out any of this root. It'll grow quite happily like that. It's nicely contained. I'm just going to put that straight into this basket with lots of gravel around it, and that's going to produce a nice plant this year. Right, there we have it. We've got 3 good-sized water lily plants now that I'm going to put back into the pond. As you can see, nothing to be frightened of, a very easy job to do. You could really do this at any time of the year. I like to try and do it sort of in spring as the plant is starting to grow. But really, if it needs to be done in the summer months or autumn, you can do so. What you will find is that if you're trying to tackle this once you've got a lot of leaf, a lot of pad on the plant, you'll invariably just break them off. And if that happens, you're going to end up having to just chop away all of the established pads and let the plant focus on root growth. So possibly for that season you may find that you don't get so many flowers and the plant itself is held back a little bit, but next season it'll be absolutely fine. We've caught this at a good time, and this isn't going to interrupt the plant's growth in any way. Later on this summer it should be a good show with plenty of flowers and lots of leaves. So all that's left for me to do is to reintroduce these back into the pond, but before I do, this morning, I hit just over 5,000 subscribers, which I'm amazed at. So thank you all very, very much for all of you seasoned viewers and all of you subscribers. Thank you. You've probably already seen me do this on loads of various videos, so this might not be of any interest to you, but for any new viewers who are interested in potting on water lilies, this is how to do it. Nice and simple. It's been a miserable day. I got bitten by a dog this morning. Not so good, long story. It's been a bit wet, but I'm finished for the day. I shall look forward to getting to a nice hot bath and having a soak, I think, when I get home. But until then, thank you very much for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and I'll see you in the next pond.